The church was a vision of perfection, every detail meticulously arranged to celebrate a love story that was supposed to last forever. White roses adorned the aisles, flickering candles bathed the room in a soft golden glow, and the delicate notes of piano music floated like a promise of joy. Ava Carter, radiant in her lace gown, felt her heartbeat echo through the silence as she walked toward the altar. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her bouquet, but her smile never wavered. This was the moment she had dreamed about since childhood. Every step felt sacred, every gaze fixed on her as family, friends, and well-wishers leaned forward to witness the union of two souls. Yet even in her bliss, a flicker of unease tugged at her chest when she met Ryan's eyes. He stood tall, handsome in his tailored suit, but there was no warmth in his expression. His jaw was clenched, his shoulders stiff, as though he were bracing against an invisible storm. Ava ignored the warning bells, forcing herself to believe it was nerves. After all, wasn't every groom a little overwhelmed before speaking vows? With each step, she reassured herself, in a few moments, everything would be beautiful, everything would make sense. The silence grew heavier as the priest began the sacred words, asking Ryan Hayes if he would take Ava as his wife. This was the question that would seal their future, the promise meant to bind them together. But instead of the joyful affirmation Ava had always imagined, there was hesitation. A pause. A silence so sharp it sliced through the air. The congregation shifted uneasily, whispers stirring like a rising wind. Ava's smile faltered as she searched Ryan's face for comfort, but what she found was devastation. His eyes brimmed with conflict, his lips parted as though words were trapped between duty and desire. Then, with a trembling voice that carried like thunder, Ryan broke the moment. "I can't marry you," he said, turning his back on Ava. The words echoed through the cathedral, shattering the illusion of perfection. A gasp swept through the pews as shock and disbelief flooded the room. But before Ava could process the blow, he delivered another, a confession that pierced her deeper than the rejection itself. In front of everyone, Ryan declared his love for her maid of honor and closest friend, Natalie Brooks. As whispers turned into a frenzy, Ryan extended his hand to Natalie, who, with downcast eyes but no hesitation, stepped forward to stand beside him. Together, they walked away, leaving Ava abandoned at the altar. The impact was instant, brutal, and unforgettable. Cameras flashed as guests raised their phones, capturing the implosion of Ava's world in real time. Her parents' faces were pale, stricken with the same horror Ava felt tightening in her chest. The weight of humiliation bore down on her as her bouquet slipped from her fingers, crashing softly onto the marble floor like a broken promise. Tears blurred her vision, but she stood frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. Her best friend, the woman who knew her secrets, her fears, her dreams, had stolen the man she thought would be her forever. And Ryan had chosen betrayal over loyalty, devastation over love. Ava's world didn't just crack, it crumbled. Every whispered judgment from the crowd, every pitying gaze, pressed on her like daggers. The life she envisioned vanished in an instant, leaving only raw emptiness in its place. Her lips trembled as she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of grief, "He didn't just leave me, he destroyed me." That single line, soft yet piercing, sealed the moment in memory, a wound too deep to ignore, a betrayal too public to erase. It was not just the end of a wedding. It was the brutal, humiliating end of innocence, trust, and the version of love Ava once believed in. Ava Carter had been molded by her upbringing into the embodiment of responsibility. Born into a household where values, tradition, and appearances mattered, she carried the weight of expectation from an early age. Her mother, Linda, raised her to be polite, reliable, and diligent, the daughter who never strayed from the path of what was right. Ava absorbed these lessons so deeply that she often placed her own desires last, sacrificing freedom for the sake of stability. Even in her youth, she became the peacemaker of the family, the one who carried burdens so others could feel lighter. When her younger brother, Ethan, rebelled against curfews or argued with their parents, Ava was the one who smoothed the tension. When Natalie, her childhood friend, felt lost or insecure, Ava offered comfort, advice, and sometimes even excuses to cover her mistakes. Her life had been defined by giving time, effort, loyalty, always pouring out of herself until she was empty. The irony was cruel. The very people she supported and trusted most would one day betray her in the most unforgivable way. Yet before the wedding, Ava never imagined it possible. She believed her sacrifices secured love, her devotion guaranteed loyalty. She was wrong. Her relationship with Ryan was built on years of unwavering support, though in retrospect, it was Ava who carried most of the weight. When Ryan pursued law school, his ambitions demanded not just his time but financial stability he couldn't provide alone. Ava stepped into the role of provider, juggling 2 jobs, long days at a publishing firm and late nights waiting tables. Her friends teased her about being the wife before the vows, but Ava wore that devotion like armor, believing it was proof of her commitment. Ryan, charming and ambitious, leaned heavily on her strength, praising her sacrifice while using it as fuel to build his career. Ava clung to the idea that once his degree was in hand, once the future stabilized, their love would bloom into something lasting. She never saw that for Ryan, Ava had become the symbol of duty, of stability, of a predictable life. He appreciated her, yes, but in a detached way, like a safety net he could always depend on. What Ava considered acts of love, Ryan came to see as obligations he never truly earned. To him, Natalie represented something else entirely: unpredictability, fire, temptation. It wasn't Ava's fault, but Ryan had long begun to divide his heart between responsibility and desire. Natalie Brooks, Ava's so-called sister in all but blood, had always been a force of charisma and energy. Where Ava was measured, Natalie was impulsive. Where Ava was steady, Natalie was daring. Their friendship thrived on this contrast, each filling gaps in the other's life. But beneath Natalie's laughter and boldness lurked a quieter truth: envy. 4 years, she watched Ava move through life with what appeared to be grace and balance: a supportive family, academic achievements, a stable relationship, and a future mapped out with certainty. Natalie's own path was scattered with détours, short-lived romances, and half-pursued dreams. She loved Ava, yes, but she also resented her, measuring her own flaws against Ava's quiet perfection. When Ryan entered the picture, Natalie initially played the role of confidant, listening to Ava's stories, cheering for her love. But somewhere in that intimacy, admiration warped into desire. To Natalie, Ryan wasn't just a man, he was Ava's most prized possession, proof of her seemingly perfect life. Taking him wasn't only about passion, it was about rewriting the balance between them. Natalie may never have admitted it aloud, but stealing Ryan wasn't merely betrayal. It was her way of stepping out from Ava's shadow, proving she could claim something, or someone, that. The woman who always seemed to have it all. And in that pursuit, she shattered the very bond she once vowed would last forever. The fallout from the wedding disaster was immediate and merciless. Within hours, the video of Ryan walking away with Natalie was circulating online, clipped and edited into bite-sized scandals for strangers to consume. Headlines branded Ava as the jilted bride, memes mocked her frozen expression, and anonymous commenters dissected her humiliation like it was entertainment. Ava couldn't walk into a cafe or scroll through her phone without seeing her own heartbreak replayed from a dozen angles. Friends reached out awkwardly, offering pity disguised as comfort, while colleagues at her graphic design firm whispered in hallways, their sympathetic glances cutting deeper than words. Every time she entered the office, the silence that followed her was suffocating. She had gone from respected, dependable Ava to that girl, the bride abandoned at the altar in front of a crowd and the world. And just when she thought the wound couldn't get deeper, Ryan and Natalie stepped into the spotlight, hand in hand, with the audacity to frame their betrayal as destiny. In interviews and posts, they spoke of true love, as though rewriting history with glossy words could erase the devastation they had left behind. Her family's reactions only tightened the knot of pressure around her throat. Her mother, Linda, counseled restraint and composure, urging Ava to rise above the scandal with dignity. "Moving on quietly," she said, "is the only way to preserve your future." But Ava bristled at the idea of silence equating to strength. Her father, Mark, tried to be supportive in his quiet way, but his avoidance of conflict only highlighted the absence of protection Ava longed for. The only one who truly saw her fire was Ethan, her younger brother. Outspoken and fearless, he railed against Ryan and Natalie with a bluntness that made Ava's chest ache with both gratitude and fear. He told her she deserved to fight back, to reclaim her story instead of letting the world define her by betrayal. Yet for weeks, Ava remained paralyzed between the pressure to maintain decorum and the desperate urge to scream. She buried herself in work, pretended to be fine, while beneath the surface her grief and anger churned, waiting for the moment they could no longer be contained. That moment came like a spark in dry tinder, unexpected, but inevitable. 3 months after the wedding disaster, Ava learned that Ryan and Natalie were not just together but engaged, flaunting their plans for a grand, ostentatious wedding that made her stomach twist. The audacity of their celebration, so soon after her own ruined day, was an open wound salted for spectacle. But what broke her fully wasn't the engagement announcement, it was Ryan's betrayal that followed. Ava discovered he was maneuvering to keep their old apartment, the place they once shared and built together, claiming legal entitlement because his name was on the lease. To Ava, the apartment wasn't just walls and furniture, it was her sacrifice, her savings, her late nights and early mornings poured into making a home for them both. For Ryan to attempt to steal even that felt like erasing her entirely, leaving her with nothing. Standing in those familiar rooms, rage surged through her grief, burning away the numbness that had held her captive. This wasn't just heartbreak anymore. It was war. Ava realized she could no longer be the woman who quietly endured, who put everyone else first. If Ryan and Natalie had destroyed her once, she would not give them the satisfaction of destroying her twice. That was the moment her determination crystallized. Ava Carter would take back her life, and she would do it on her terms. Ava's descent into the aftermath of betrayal was slow but suffocating. Nights became battles with insomnia, her mind replaying the wedding scene on a relentless loop. Ryan's hesitation, Natalie's smirk, the bouquet slipping from her trembling hands. Anxiety took root in her body, tightening her chest whenever she entered crowded spaces or heard whispers behind her back. At work, the pity in her colleagues' eyes felt heavier than outright cruelty, as though she was no longer seen as Ava, the talented graphic designer, but as a walking scandal. Online, the gossip never died. Every post or comment reminded her that strangers had claimed ownership of her humiliation. The cruelty cut deeper when Natalie fanned the flames herself, posting curated photos of her new life with Ryan, champagne toasts, vacation snapshots, and captions dripping with faux inspiration about finding real love after hardship. Ava would scroll, her hands shaking, torn between anger and despair. The betrayal wasn't just private, it had become performance art for an audience hungry to consume her pain. Every day chipped away at her confidence until she no longer recognized the woman staring back at her in the mirror. The cracks widened when Ryan inserted himself back into her life under the guise of seeking closure. His messages, deceptively polite, carried subtle accusations that their relationship had failed because Ava was too consumed by work, too controlling, too cautious. He painted himself as the victim of a love that suffocated him, conveniently rewriting history to absolve his betrayal. Ava, furious yet fragile, agreed to meet him and Natalie at a cafe one afternoon, a decision driven more by wounded pride than clarity. The confrontation erupted almost immediately. Ryan wore his polished charm like armor, while Natalie's words cut like knives masked in sweetness. Beneath the surface of her smug composure, however, Natalie revealed the truth: years of envy, a bitterness about always being in Ava's shadow. "You had everything," she hissed, her voice sharp. "The family, the career, the guy. Why shouldn't I have something for once?" Ava listened, torn between shock and sorrow, realizing that Natalie's betrayal wasn't just about Ryan, it was about stealing the life she believed Ava never deserved to hold so easily. That moment shattered the illusion that her best friend ever truly loved her, deepening the wound in a way no stranger's gossip ever could. But from the ruins, Ava's support system began to emerge. Ethan, fiery and protective, pushed her toward therapy, insisting she couldn't carry this weight alone. Though resistant at first, Ava began sessions, learning to name the anxiety that strangled her and slowly weaving fragments of herself back together. Journaling became her quiet rebellion, a way to reclaim her voice in pages where no one could twist her truth. At the same time, she poured herself into her design work with renewed intensity, using creativity as both refuge and weapon. Her dedication caught her boss's attention, leading to the offer of a major project that could redefine her career. It was the first glimmer of hope Ava had felt since the wedding, a reminder that she was still capable of building something lasting. Yet, just as she began to breathe again, Ryan struck from the shadows. Now socially elevated by his relationship with Natalie, he spread poisonous whispers that Ava was unstable, hinting that her heartbreak had left her incapable of handling responsibility. His lies threatened not just her reputation but the fragile confidence she was fighting to rebuild. This betrayal felt different from the altar. It wasn't public spectacle but quiet sabotage, designed to undermine her future. For Ava, it became the ultimate test, to either let Ryan's narrative consume her, or to rise, stronger and unshakable, rewriting the story for herself. Ryan and Natalie's wedding was everything Ava's had never been: extravagant, headline-worthy, and meticulously crafted for the cameras. Media swarmed the grand venue, their lenses flashing as if the couple were royalty rather than two people who had built their love on the ashes of betrayal. For Ava, the cruel irony arrived disguised as professionalism. Her firm had been hired to create the event visuals, and only after weeks of planning did she realize the clients' names. Her first instinct was to walk away, to protect herself from reopening the wound. But something inside her shifted. For the first time, Ava chose not to run but to stand her ground. Accepting the project became her silent rebellion, a way of reclaiming control over the narrative Ryan and Natalie had tried to strip from her. The closer the day approached, the more her anxiety battled with defiance. She told herself she was no longer the abandoned bride, no longer that girl on viral videos. She was a professional, an artist, and she would prove it even if it meant walking straight into the lion's den of her past. But fate handed her more than quiet resolve. At the rehearsal dinner, Ava lingered near the back of the hall, checking design placements, when she caught the sharp laughter of Ryan speaking with one of his groomsmen. Curiosity rooted her in place, and what she overheard froze her blood. Ryan, smug and careless, admitted that even while engaged to Natalie, he had been unfaithful with another woman, a fleeting indulgence he dismissed as just keeping options open. The words dripped with the same entitlement Ava had once mistaken for charm. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a pattern, a revelation that Ryan's betrayal wasn't about passion or even Natalie, it was about him, a man addicted to conquest and incapable of loyalty. Ava's phone shook in her hands as she hit record, capturing every damning word. For the first time since the altar humiliation, power tilted in her direction. She didn't plan revenge, not exactly. But she knew that this truth, if revealed, could collapse the fragile empire Ryan had built on deception. The wedding itself began as a spectacle of perfection: white roses, glittering chandeliers, and guests buzzing with anticipation. Ryan, beaming with rehearsed sincerity, raised a glass during his speech and spoke of love, trust, and honesty. But before his words could finish echoing, the massive screen behind him flickered to life. The recording, his own voice bragging about cheating on both Ava and Natalie, played for everyone to hear, projected larger than life. Gasps rippled through the crowd, confusion turning to outrage. Natalie's face drained of color as she processed the truth. The man she had betrayed her best friend for had betrayed her too. Whispers rose to shouts, guests horrified as the facade shattered in real time. Ryan's charm collapsed into panic, his protests drowned out by the undeniable evidence of his voice condemning him. And at the edge of the chaos, Ethan stood calmly by the projection booth, his quiet smirk confirming their accident was no accident at all. In that moment, Ava didn't feel humiliated or broken. She felt vindicated. The wedding didn't just unravel, it imploded, leaving Ryan exposed, Natalie devastated, and the audience who once pitied Ava now watching Ryan's empire burn. The collapse of Ryan and Natalie's grand wedding sent shockwaves through the very crowd they had tried so hard to impress. Natalie, once so confident in her victory over Ava, turned into a storm of rage and humiliation. Betrayed in front of hundreds, she lashed out at Ryan in a voice sharp enough to silence the chatter. "You ruined me," she spat, her mascara running as cameras captured her unraveling. For Natalie, who had built her identity on appearances, this was a death blow, her perfect facade cracked beyond repair. With gasps following her every step, she stormed out of the venue, clutching her skirts as though she could hide from the very audience she had once flaunted. The same people who had celebrated her love story now watched her downfall with a mix of pity and judgment. And in that irony lay the truth. Natalie had wanted to take Ava's life, but instead, she inherited Ryan's destruction. For the first time, Ava saw her friend not as the enemy who stole her fiancé, but as a woman consumed by envy, who had traded loyalty for ashes. That realization gave Ava not satisfaction, but clarity. It was never about winning or losing. It was about choosing differently. Ryan's own collapse came swiftly and mercilessly. The scandal spread across the city like wildfire, tainting not only his reputation as a man but as a lawyer. His arrogance, once shielded by charm, now marked him as reckless and untrustworthy. Clients withdrew, his law firm severed ties, and the very social circles he had clawed his way into discarded him like a liability. Without Natalie to shield him and without Ava to steady him, Ryan was left exposed, his empire of entitlement crumbling around him. Ava could have gloated, many would have expected her to, but instead she watched with a kind of distant calm. For years, she had carried Ryan, excused him, sacrificed for him. Now, she no longer felt the pull to fix or to pity. He was no longer her responsibility. As chaos erupted behind her, Ava chose to leave quietly, stepping out into the fresh air with her head held high. In that moment, she felt lighter than she had in years. She realized that true power wasn't in revenge or spectacle, it was in walking away free, unchained from the people who had tried to define her. In the months that followed, Ava transformed not only her career but herself. Her bold designs from the wedding event, ironically the very stage of her vindication, went viral, praised for their creativity and emotional resonance. New clients sought her out, drawn to her vision, and for the first time, Ava wasn't working to prove her worth to anyone but herself. At home, she continued therapy, learning to untangle her identity from years of sacrifice and quiet endurance. She began building a new circle of supportive friends, people who valued her not for her ability to fix their lives, but for the light she brought simply by being herself. One of the most defining moments came with her mother, Linda. Standing tall, Ava finally told her that she would no longer live by pressure or appearances, but by her own choices. To her surprise, Linda didn't argue, but softened, finally seeing the strength in her daughter's independence. It was a moment of healing, a shift in their relationship long overdue. Ava's journey was not about reclaiming what was taken from her, but about redefining who she wanted to be. From betrayal and heartbreak had come clarity, freedom, and a renewed sense of self. She had been destroyed once, but in rebuilding, Ava discovered something greater: resilience. And this time, the story was hers alone to write. Months later, Ava found herself standing before the carefully zipped garment bag that held what would have been her second wedding dress, a gown she had never worn, purchased in a fleeting attempt at reclaiming what Ryan and Natalie had stolen. For a long time, she couldn't even look at it without feeling the sting of humiliation and disappointment, but healing had changed the way she saw it. No longer did it represent loss. Instead, it was simply fabric, waiting to carry a new story. One crisp morning, she carried the dress to a charity boutique that specialized in providing bridal gowns for women who couldn't afford them. Her hands trembled slightly as she laid it gently on the counter, but her heart was steady. Before leaving, she slipped a handwritten note into the folds of the gown: "May this dress bring someone joy, not chains." It wasn't bitterness that guided her words, but grace. In giving the dress away, Ava wasn't discarding her pain, she was transforming it into a gift, proof that her past no longer owned her. She walked out lighter, her steps unburdened, her soul finally free of the shadows Ryan and Natalie had cast. That night, as the city lights shimmered outside her apartment window, Ava opened her journal. Journaling had become her lifeline, a ritual of self-reflection and honesty that grounded her when the noise of the world threatened to overwhelm her. Flipping to a fresh page, she paused before writing a truth that had crystallized in her heart: "He left me for her. But in losing them, I found me." The words were not written in anger, but with a calm acceptance that surprised her. For so long, she had defined herself by what she gave to others: her parents, her brother, Ryan, even Natalie. But in the ashes of betrayal, she had uncovered a part of herself she'd neglected: her own worth, her own voice, her own dreams. Closing the journal, Ava smiled faintly, realizing that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about reclaiming. She no longer felt like the woman abandoned at the altar, nor the woman pitied by strangers. She was simply Ava, whole, resilient, and finally at peace with herself. The final chapter of this season in her life unfolded not in a moment of spectacle, but in quiet simplicity. On a bright afternoon, sunlight streamed into a small cafe where Ava sat with her sketchbook open, her pencil moving fluidly across the page as she breathed life into a new design. The cafe hummed with gentle chatter, the world continuing around her, yet she felt fully present in a way she hadn't in years. Ethan appeared at her side, sliding a cup of coffee toward her with a teasing grin. No grand speeches passed between them, just the comfort of shared silence, of family that had stood by her when the rest of her world collapsed. Ava looked up from her sketches, gazing out at the city beyond the window. The skyline stretched endlessly, a reminder that the world was vast and her story still unfolding. In that moment, she realized she didn't need a partner, a wedding, or anyone else's validation to feel complete. She already had everything she needed within herself. Her heart no longer ached for what had been lost, it pulsed with anticipation for what was yet to come. And as her eyes lingered on the horizon, Ava's final thought crystallized into words she knew would guide her forever: love built on betrayal never lasts. But self-love, that's forever.